"You'll warm our beds every night," said the three giant women who locked the bedroom door behind him. The gunshot echoed across the desert like thunder, but Cassandra Reeves did not flinch. She stood on the wooden porch of her ranch house, watching the dust cloud rise from where the bullet had struck the ground mere inches from the stranger's boots. The man did not move either, his weathered hands steady at his sides, dark eyes fixed on hers with an intensity that made the scorching Arizona sun feel cool by comparison. 3 months without rain. The Henderson River had dried to cracked earth and bitter memories. Every well within 50 miles had gone dry, every water source claimed by the desert's relentless thirst. Every source except one. The well behind Cassandra's house still ran deep and clear, fed by an underground spring her grandfather had discovered 40 years ago when he first claimed this land. Now, in 1893, that water was worth more than gold, more than cattle, more than life itself. "You missed on purpose," the stranger said, his voice carrying easily across the 30 yards that separated them. His accent held traces of Texas, maybe Oklahoma. A cowboy's drawl softened by education. Cassandra stepped down from the porch, her boots clicking against the sun-bleached wood. At 20, she had inherited more than just land from her grandfather. She had inherited his stubbornness, his sharp eye, and his ability to read men like open books. This stranger, with his clean-shaven jaw and expensive leather holster, was not what he appeared to be. "Next one won't be," she replied, not lowering the Winchester rifle. "State your business or ride on." The man's horse, a magnificent black stallion that must have cost more than most folks saw in a year, shifted restlessly beneath him. Everything about the stranger spoke of money, of influence, of power. His clothes were dusty from travel but cut from fine fabric. His boots were hand-tooled leather. The colt at his hip was silver inlaid and pristine. "Name's Marcus Dalton," he said, dismounting with fluid grace. "I represent certain interests back east. Investors who understand the value of water in times like these." The name meant nothing to Cassandra, but the way he said it suggested it should. She had lived her entire life in this remote corner of Arizona territory, where the nearest town was a day's hard ride and news from the outside world arrived weeks late if it arrived at all. But she was not naive. She understood what certain interests back east meant. "Water's not for sale," she said. Marcus smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "Everything's for sale, Miss Reeves. It's just a matter of finding the right price." Behind him, dust clouds on the horizon suggested he had not come alone. Cassandra counted at least 6 riders approaching, still distant but moving with purpose. Her ranch hands, what few remained loyal, were out checking the surviving cattle near the southern boundary. She was alone. "You seem to know my name," she said, "but you haven't asked permission to water your horse." "A courtesy I appreciate," Marcus said, leading his stallion toward the well. "But I'm afraid courtesy won't solve the larger problem we're facing." Cassandra moved to intercept him, the rifle never wavering from its target. "The larger problem is men like you thinking they can take what belongs to others." "What belongs to others?" Marcus stopped, tilting his hat back to reveal steel-gray eyes. "Miss Reeves, do you know how many head of cattle have died in the past month alone? How many families have abandoned their homesteads? How many children have gone without clean water because one person hoards what could save them all?" The words stung because they held truth. Cassandra had seen the families passing through, their wagons loaded with everything they owned, their faces hollow with defeat. She had given water to some, traded it for supplies with others, but her well was not limitless. If she gave freely to everyone, it would run dry within weeks. "I don't hoard anything," she said. "I trade fairly with those who need it. Do you?" Marcus gestured toward the approaching riders. 3 days ago, the Morrison family came through here. Father, mother, 3 children under 10 years old. They offered you their last $20 for enough water to reach California. You turned them away. Cassandra's jaw tightened. She remembered the Morrisons, remembered the desperation in the father's eyes, the way the youngest child clung to her mother's skirts. She also remembered that they had been the fifth family that week, and her water levels were dropping faster than she could track. They wanted enough water for a week's travel. I gave them what they needed to reach Tucson, where they could resupply. Tucson's wells are dry too. The simple statement hit like a physical blow. Cassandra had hoped that the drought was localized. If Tucson was dry, if the larger settlements were struggling, then the situation was far worse than she had imagined. The approaching riders were closer now, close enough to make out individual figures. 6 men, all armed, all riding with the confidence of those accustomed to getting their way. Marcus Dalton was not just a representative. He was the advance guard of something larger, something that would not be turned away by threats or rifle fire. "What do you want?" she asked. "Partnership," Marcus said. "My investors want to purchase water rights from you. Not the land, not the ranch, just access to the well. We'll install pumping equipment, increase the flow rate, and distribute water to everyone who needs it. You'll receive a percentage of all profits plus a substantial upfront payment." "And if I refuse?" Marcus's smile returned, colder this time. "Miss Reeves, you're a smart woman. You know this drought won't last forever. Eventually, the rains will come, the rivers will flow again, and water will be abundant. But right now, today, you're sitting on the only reliable source for hundreds of miles. That makes you powerful, but it also makes you a target." The riders had reached the property line, spreading out in a semicircle that suggested military training. They did not advance further, but their message was clear. Cassandra was outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of options. "I need time to think," she said. "Of course. But time is a luxury none of us can afford." Marcus pulled a gold pocket watch from his vest, checking it with theatrical precision. "It's 2:30 in the afternoon. I'll need your answer by sunset." "And if my answer is no?" Marcus snapped the watch shut, the sound sharp as a gunshot in the desert air. "Then we'll discuss alternative arrangements. But I sincerely hope it doesn't come to that." He mounted his stallion with the same fluid grace, settling into the saddle like a man born to it. The horse danced sideways, eager to run, but Marcus held it steady with casual expertise. "One more thing, Miss Reeves. You might want to check your southern boundary today. I believe some of your cattle have wandered onto neighboring property." With that cryptic warning, he wheeled his horse around and rode back toward his men. They fell into formation around him, a disciplined unit moving with military precision across the desert landscape. Cassandra watched until they disappeared behind a ridge, then lowered her rifle with shaking hands. The southern boundary. Her cattle were grazing there under the watchful eyes of Tom Henderson and Miguel Santos, her 2 most trusted hands. If something had happened to them, if Marcus's men had already made their first move, she saddled her mare, a sturdy buckskin named Sage, and rode hard toward the southern pastures. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air into visible waves of heat that distorted the horizon. Sweat soaked through her shirt within minutes, and she found herself rationing sips from her canteen despite having unlimited access to well water. The drought had changed everything. Plants that had survived for decades were dying. Animals were abandoning their traditional territories in search of water. The entire ecosystem was collapsing, and she was sitting at the center of it like a spider in a web, controlling the one resource that meant survival. The southern pastures came into view, and Cassandra's heart sank. Her cattle were there, nearly 50 head of prime beef, but they were no longer on her land. Someone had cut the fence and driven them across the boundary onto the adjacent property, land owned by a shell company that had purchased it 6 months ago for reasons no one understood. Until now. Tom Henderson and Miguel Santos were nowhere to be seen. Their horses were gone, their camping equipment abandoned. Fresh tracks in the dirt told the story. Multiple riders had surrounded the camp sometime in the past few hours, then departed with her men. Cassandra dismounted and examined the scene more closely. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. Whatever had happened, her men had gone willingly or under duress so subtle it left no trace. A piece of paper was pinned to the fence post where the wire had been cut. Cassandra unfolded it, recognizing Marcus Dalton's precise handwriting, Miss Reeves. Your men are unharmed and will remain so as long as our negotiations proceed cordially. The cattle have been relocated to ensure they receive adequate water during these difficult times. Both men and livestock will be returned upon successful completion of our business arrangement. Respectfully, Min Dalton, respectfully. The word tasted like dust and ashes in her mouth. This was not respect. This was calculated pressure applied with surgical precision. Marcus had identified her vulnerabilities and moved against them while maintaining plausible deniability. The cattle had wandered onto neighboring property. Her men had accepted better employment elsewhere. No laws had been broken, no obvious crimes committed. But the message was unmistakable. Surrender your water rights or lose everything else. Cassandra crumpled the note and shoved it into her pocket. She had perhaps 3 hours until sunset, 3 hours to decide whether to fight or surrender. But the choice was not as simple as Marcus Dalton assumed. He saw her as an isolated rancher with limited resources, vulnerable to pressure and coercion. He did not know about the cave system beneath her property, the one her grandfather had mapped but never spoke about. He did not know about the emergency supplies hidden there or the escape routes that led deep into the desert. Most importantly, he did not know about the dynamite her grandfather had stockpiled during his mining days, explosives that could collapse the well forever if necessary. Marcus Dalton wanted to control her water, but Cassandra Reeves would rather destroy it than let it fall into the wrong hands. She remounted Sage and rode back toward the ranch, her mind racing through possibilities. The approaching riders from earlier were probably setting up camp somewhere nearby, close enough to respond quickly but far enough to avoid direct confrontation. They would be watching her, waiting for signs of compliance or resistance. Let them watch. Back at the ranch house, Cassandra went through the motions of normal evening activities. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, tended to her garden. To any observer, she appeared to be a young woman going about her daily routine, perhaps contemplating Marcus's offer, but showing no signs of panic or desperation. Inside, she was planning. The cave entrance was concealed behind a false wall in the root cellar, accessible through a narrow passage that her grandfather had disguised as a storage alcove. She had explored those tunnels as a child, playing games of hide-and-seek with imaginary friends in the cool darkness. Now those games might save her life. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Cassandra made her final preparations. She loaded her rifle and pistol, filled her canteen, and gathered emergency supplies into a leather saddlebag. If negotiations went badly, she would need to disappear quickly. At 5:30, she spotted dust clouds approaching from the north. Marcus Dalton was returning, right on schedule, probably confident that a young woman alone would see reason when faced with overwhelming odds. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. The black stallion emerged from the desert heat like something from a fever dream, its rider sitting tall and confident in the saddle. Marcus had changed clothes, trading his travel-dusty outfit for a clean white shirt and black vest. He looked like a man attending a business meeting rather than delivering an ultimatum. "Miss Reeves," he called as he approached the well. "I trust you've had time to consider our proposition." Cassandra stepped out onto the porch, her hands empty, but her rifle leaning against the doorframe within easy reach. "I have." "And?" She let the silence stretch, watching his confident expression slowly give way to uncertainty. In the distance, his men were emerging from concealment, positioning themselves around the property's perimeter. 6 riders had become 12, all armed, all ready for trouble. "My grandfather built this ranch with his own hands," she said finally. "He dug that well with a pick and shovel, one rock at a time. He fought Apache raiders, survived droughts, endured winters that killed weaker men. You think I'm going to hand over his legacy to a pack of Eastern carpetbaggers? Marcus's jaw tightened. Miss Reeves, I hoped we could resolve this amicably. So did I. That's why I'm giving you one chance to ride away and never come back. You're outnumbered 12-1. I'm aware of the odds. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of bluff or bravado. He would not find them. Cassandra had made her decision, and uncertainty was a luxury she could not afford. Very well, he said, dismounting with deliberate slowness. Since you've chosen the hard way, let me explain how this is going to work. My men will establish a perimeter around your property. Nothing goes in or out without my permission. No food, no supplies, no communication with the outside world. We'll wait as long as necessary for you to see reason. A siege, a negotiation with enhanced incentives. Cassandra almost smiled. And you think I'll just sit here and starve? I think you're a practical woman who will recognize reality when it stares her in the face. Marcus walked toward the well, his boots crunching on the sun-baked earth. This water is too valuable to remain under the control of one person. The greater good demands. The greater good? Cassandra's voice cracked like a whip. You're not here for the greater good. You're here to make money off other people's desperation. Marcus reached the well and peered down into its depths. Even in the failing light, the water was visible 20 feet below, clear and inviting. Money is just a tool, Miss Reeves. What matters is efficient distribution of resources. I can move this water to where it's needed most. At a profit. Of course, at a profit. That's what makes the system sustainable. Marcus straightened, brushing dust from his hands. Charity feels good, but it doesn't solve long-term problems. Economic incentives create lasting solutions. As he spoke, his men closed their circle around the property. They moved with professional competence, taking positions that covered all approaches and escape routes, or at least all the obvious ones. Last chance, Marcus said. Sign the contract, take the money, and help us save lives. Or watch your ranch become a prison while good people die of thirst. Cassandra looked up at the darkening sky, where the first stars were beginning to appear. Sunset was still minutes away, but the day was ending regardless. Decision time. I have a counteroffer, she said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. I'm listening. Take your men and ride out. Never come back. In exchange, I won't kill you. For a moment, Marcus looked genuinely surprised. Then he laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Miss Reeves, you're holding a losing hand. Bluffs won't change that. Who said I was bluffing? Something in her tone made Marcus step back from the well. His right hand drifted toward his pistol, then stopped as he remembered the rifle leaning against her doorframe. You would murder 12 men to protect water rights? I would defend my home against invaders. That's not murder. That's justice. The standoff stretched between them like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Around the property's perimeter, Marcus's men waited for orders, their own weapons ready but not yet drawn. The situation balanced on a knife's edge, and everyone knew it. Then Marcus smiled, and Cassandra knew she was in serious trouble. Actually, he said, I have some news that might change your perspective. Tom Henderson and Miguel Santos send their regards. From the darkening desert came the sound of approaching horses. Not Marcus's men this time, but 2 riders escorted by armed guards. As they drew closer, Cassandra's heart sank. Tom and Miguel sat slumped in their saddles, their hands bound, their faces bearing the marks of rough treatment. They're alive and unharmed, Marcus said conversationally, for now. But their continued well-being depends entirely on your cooperation. The escort brought the 2 men close enough for Cassandra to see them clearly. Tom Henderson, her foreman for the past 5 years, caught her eye and shook his head slightly. A warning. Miguel Santos, barely 18 but already one of the best horsemen she had ever seen, stared at the ground in shame. Let them go, Cassandra said. your business is with me. My business is water rights, and I'll use whatever leverage necessary to secure them." Marcus pulled out his pocket watch again, checking the time with exaggerated precision. "The sun has set, Miss Reeves. I need your answer." Cassandra looked at her men, saw the fear and determination warring in their faces. She thought about her grandfather, about the legacy he had entrusted to her. She thought about the Morrison family and the dozens of others who had passed through seeking water. She thought about the cave system beneath her feet and the dynamite hidden in its depths. Most of all, she thought about Marcus Dalton's assumption that he could take whatever he wanted simply because he had more men and guns. "My answer," she said, "is go to hell." Marcus nodded as if he had expected nothing else. "I was afraid you would say that." He gestured to his men, and two of them dismounted, walking purposefully toward Tom and Miguel. "Since you've chosen to be unreasonable, perhaps your employees will be more cooperative." "Leave them out of this," Cassandra snapped, her hand moving toward her rifle. "I'm afraid it's too late for that." Marcus watched as his men untied Tom and Miguel, forcing them to stand beside their horses. "You see, Miss Reeves, I've learned that people rarely act purely in their own self-interest. They need additional motivation." Tom Henderson straightened despite his bonds, fixing Marcus with a steady glare. At 45, he had the weathered look of a man who had spent his entire adult life working cattle under the desert sun. His loyalty to the Reeves family ran deep, forged through years of shared hardship and mutual respect. "Miss Cassandra," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the yard, "don't you worry about us none. We knew what we signed up for when we took this job." Miguel Santos nodded agreement, though fear flickered in his dark eyes. He was young enough to be Tom's son, raised on a small ranch 30 miles south until drought had forced his family to seek work elsewhere. Cassandra had hired him 6 months ago, and he had thrown himself into the work with the enthusiasm of youth and the desperation of poverty. "Admirable loyalty," Marcus observed, "but misplaced. Miss Reeves, your men are going to help demonstrate the consequences of stubbornness." He produced a length of rope from his saddlebags, the kind used for hanging. The message was unmistakable, and Cassandra felt ice form in her stomach despite the lingering heat of the day. "You're talking about murder," she said. "I'm talking about necessary pressure. No one has to die tonight if you make the right choice." Marcus tested the rope's strength with a sharp tug. "But I need you to understand that I'm completely serious about this arrangement." Around the property perimeter, his men had positioned themselves with military precision. They controlled every approach, every escape route, every angle of fire. Even if Cassandra could reach her rifle, even if she could take down Marcus himself, his men would cut her to pieces before she could help Tom and Miguel. But Marcus had made a crucial mistake. He assumed that controlling the obvious approaches meant controlling everything. He did not know about the hidden passages beneath the ranch, the network of natural caves that her grandfather had expanded over decades of patient work. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, buying time while her mind raced through possibilities. "A signature on a simple contract. You retain ownership of the land, but my investors gain exclusive rights to extract and distribute water from your well. In exchange, you receive $5,000 immediately and 10% of all revenues generated." $5,000 was more money than most ranchers saw in a decade. Under normal circumstances, it would be a generous offer. But these were not normal circumstances, and Marcus was not a generous man. 10% seems low for someone providing the only working well in the territory, Marcus smiled. "You're in no position to negotiate percentages, Miss Reeves. The offer is what it is. And if the well runs dry, if your extraction methods damage the underground spring, those are acceptable risks. The immediate need outweighs long-term concerns." There it was. Marcus and his investors saw her well as a resource to be exploited, not preserved. They would pump it dry if necessary, extract maximum profit in minimum time, then move on to the next opportunity. The families depending on that water for survival would be left with nothing. How do I know you'll honor the contract once you have control? You don't. But the alternative is watching your friends die while your ranch becomes a battleground. Marcus gestured toward Tom and Miguel, who stood with quiet dignity despite their precarious situation. Choose quickly, Miss Reeves. My patience has limits. Cassandra glanced toward the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight were fading into purple darkness. Stars were emerging overhead, the same stars her grandfather had used to navigate during his early days in the territory. He had been a practical man, not given to sentiment or romantic notions about the land. But he had also been fiercely independent, unwilling to bow to pressure from anyone. I need to see the contract first, she said. Marcus produced a folded document from his vest pocket, clearly prepared for this moment. Standard mining rights agreement adapted for water extraction. Your signature goes at the bottom. He handed her the papers, and Cassandra made a show of examining them carefully. The language was dense and filled with legal terminology, but the basic terms were as Marcus had described. Exclusive extraction rights in perpetuity, $5,000 upfront, 10% of net revenues. What caught her attention was a clause buried deep in the document's technical language. In the event of resource depletion or extraction difficulties, the contracting party assumes full liability for alternative arrangements. That could mean anything from trucking in water to relocating entire communities. And full liability meant Cassandra would be responsible for costs that could bankrupt her within months. This liability clause, she said, pointing to the relevant section. Standard legal protection, nothing to worry about. It makes me responsible for providing water even if the well goes dry. Marcus waved dismissively. Hypothetical concerns. Our geological surveys indicate the aquifer can support increased extraction for at least 5 years. 5 years. After that, the water would be gone forever, the spring poisoned or depleted beyond recovery. Marcus was offering her $5,000 and 10% of revenues for a resource that could sustain her family for generations. I need more time to think, she said. You've had all afternoon to think. Marcus's patience was wearing thin, his polished veneer cracking to reveal something harder underneath. Sign the contract or watch your men hang. Tom Henderson cleared his throat. Miss Cassandra, you mind if I say something? Marcus nodded permission, curious to hear what the older man might offer. I've worked this land for 5 years, Tom said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Before that, I worked for your grandfather for another 10. In all that time, I never seen him back down from a fight, no matter the odds. Your grandfather is dead, Marcus pointed out. Dead men don't need water. No, but their principles live on. Tom looked directly at Cassandra. He used to say that some things are worth more than money, more than comfort, more than safety. He said a person's word and their land were the only things that truly belonged to them. Miguel nodded agreement. My father, he say the same thing. Better to die standing than live on your knees. Marcus laughed harshly. Noble sentiments from men about to die for someone else's stubbornness. Miss Reeves, are their principles worth their lives? The question hung in the desert air like smoke from a campfire. Around them, Marcus's men waited with professional patience, their weapons ready but not yet drawn. The night was full of tension, of possibilities both terrible and heroic. Cassandra thought about her grandfather's stories told during long winter evenings when the desert wind howled around the ranch house. Stories about fighting for what was right, about standing against overwhelming odds, about the cost of surrender and the price of resistance. She thought about the Morrison family and the dozens of others who would follow, all seeking the water that Marcus wanted to control. Under his management, that water would go to the highest bidder, not to those who needed it most. Children would die while profit margins were calculated. Most of all, she thought about the dynamite hidden in the caves beneath her feet. Her grandfather had prepared for this moment, had foreseen the day when someone would try to take by force what they could not obtain by negotiation. He had given her the tools to deny them, even if it meant destroying everything in the process. "You know what?" she said, folding the contract and handing it back to Marcus. "You're right. Some things are worth more than money." Marcus's face darkened. "Are you certain about this decision?" "Never been more certain of anything in my life." "Very well." Marcus turned toward his men. "String them up." Two of the gunmen moved toward Tom and Miguel, producing additional rope and looking around for suitable hanging trees. The ranch had few large trees, but the old cottonwood near the well would serve their purposes. Cassandra watched the preparations with growing horror. She had called Marcus's bluff, assuming he would not actually commit murder. But the cold efficiency of his men's actions suggested she had badly misjudged the situation. "Wait," she said. Marcus raised his hand, stopping his men's advance. "Changed your mind?" "I want to make a counteroffer. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. Maybe not. But you're making a mistake if you think I'm helpless." Cassandra stepped backward toward her porch, closer to the rifle leaning against the doorframe. "You want my water? You'll have to kill me to get it." "That can be arranged. But here's the thing, Marcus. You kill me, you kill my men, and you still don't get what you came for." Marcus frowned. "The well doesn't disappear just because you're dead." "No, but access to it does." Cassandra smiled grimly. "You think my grandfather was just a simple rancher? He spent 20 years mining silver in Colorado before he came here. He knew a thing or two about explosives." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Marcus's features. "What are you talking about?" "There's enough dynamite buried around this well to turn it into a crater 50 feet deep. And the only person who knows where the charges are placed is me." It was not entirely true. The dynamite existed, carefully positioned in the cave system to collapse key support structures if necessary. But the charges were not yet in place around the well itself. That would require time and preparation she did not have. But Marcus did not know that. "You're bluffing," he said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Am I? You willing to bet your investors' money on that assumption?" Cassandra took another step toward her rifle. "See, here's what I think happened. Your people did their research, found out about the well, figured they could intimidate one young woman into signing over her rights. But they didn't dig deep enough. They didn't learn about my grandfather's mining background or his preparations for exactly this kind of situation." Marcus's men were looking toward him for orders, their earlier confidence shaken by this unexpected development. If Cassandra was telling the truth, if explosives were already in place, then their mission had just become infinitely more complicated. "Even if you're not bluffing," Marcus said slowly, "destroying the well serves no one. You'd be killing the only water source for hundreds of miles. Better destroyed than controlled by men like you." "That's madness." "Maybe, but it's my madness on my land protecting my water." Cassandra's hand brushed against her rifle stock. "So here's my final offer. Take your men and ride out. Right now, tonight, and never come back. And if we refuse?" Cassandra's smile was cold as winter wind. "Then we all die together, and the desert keeps its secrets forever." The standoff stretched between them like a bridge over an abyss. Around the ranch, Marcus's men waited for orders that did not come. Their leader was calculating odds, weighing risks against rewards, trying to determine if a 20-year-old woman had the courage to destroy everything rather than surrender. In the distance, a coyote howled, its voice echoing across the empty landscape. The sound was lonely and wild, a reminder that the desert had been here long before humans arrived and would remain long after they were gone. "You have 1 minute to decide," Cassandra said, her hand closing around the rifle stock. "After that, I start shooting, and we see what happens next." Marcus Dalton, for the first time since arriving at the ranch, looked like a man who had not planned for this contingency. His careful strategy was unraveling, his assumptions proving false. He had expected fear, compliance, reasonable negotiation in the face of overwhelming force. He had not expected defiance backed by the threat of mutual destruction. 30 seconds, Cassandra said. The dessert held its breath. Marcus Dalton stared at Cassandra Reeves across 30 yards of moonlit desert, his mind racing through calculations that had suddenly become far more complex. Behind him, his men waited with increasing nervousness, their earlier confidence eroded by talk of hidden explosives and mutual destruction. 10 seconds, Cassandra said, lifting the Winchester to her shoulder. The rifle's barrel caught starlight, a thin line of silver pointing directly at Marcus's chest. At this range, with her obvious familiarity with the weapon, she would not miss. But more importantly, if she was telling the truth about the dynamite, killing her would accomplish nothing except destroying the very resource his investors had sent him to secure. "Stand down," Marcus called to his men, raising his hands in a gesture of temporary surrender. Relief flooded through Cassandra, though she kept it hidden behind a mask of grim determination. The bluff had worked, buying her precious time to consider her options. But she knew Marcus was too intelligent, too experienced, to be fooled for long. He would probe her defenses, test her resolve, look for weaknesses in her story. "Smart choice," she said, not lowering the rifle. "Now order your men back, all of them." Marcus hesitated, then gestured toward his gunmen. "Fall back to the ridge. Maintain visual contact, but do not engage unless I signal." The men retreated with obvious reluctance, their leader's capitulation clearly unexpected. They had been hired as enforcers, not negotiators, and this sudden shift in tactics left them uncertain about their role. As the immediate threat receded, Tom Henderson straightened his shoulders and fixed Marcus with a steady stare. "Looks like you picked the wrong ranch to rob, mister." "This isn't over," Marcus replied. "Miss Reeves may have bought herself some time, but time won't solve the fundamental problem. This territory needs water, and she has the only reliable source." "Then maybe you should have tried asking nicely instead of threatening to hang folks," Miguel Santos said quietly. Marcus turned his attention back to Cassandra. "You're right about one thing. My research was incomplete. I underestimated your preparedness. But explosives work both ways, Miss Reeves. If you can destroy the well, my men can certainly neutralize any charges you might have placed. Can they?" Cassandra smiled coldly. "You willing to bet your life on their demolition skills? Because that's what you're doing. One wrong move, one cut wire, and this whole valley becomes a smoking crater." It was another bluff, but backed by enough technical possibility to give Marcus pause. Explosives were unpredictable, especially in the hands of amateurs. Even if his men located the charges, attempting to disarm them carried enormous risks. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I told you. Take your men and ride out." "That's not going to happen. Too much money has been invested in this operation. Then we have a problem." Marcus walked slowly toward the well, his hands still raised but his eyes constantly moving, cataloging details that might prove useful. The wooden structure was solid but not elaborate, built for function rather than appearance. The rope and bucket system was well maintained, suggesting regular use. Most importantly, he saw no obvious signs of explosive placement. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the well. Cassandra nodded, keeping the rifle trained on him as he peered down into the depths. The water level was lower than it had been a month ago, but still substantial. Enough to supply his operation for years if properly managed. "Beautiful work," Marcus said admiringly. "Your grandfather was a craftsman. The stonework alone must have taken months to complete. 18 months, actually. He hand-selected every rock, fitted each piece individually. And you're prepared to destroy it all rather than share it?" "I'm prepared to destroy it rather than let you control it." Cassandra's voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "There's a difference." Marcus studied her face in the moonlight, searching for cracks in her resolve. He found none. This was not the frightened young woman he had expected to encounter. This was someone who had inherited more than land from her grandfather. "Let me propose a compromise," he said. "I'm listening. My investors retain water rights, but you maintain control of distribution. You decide who gets water and when. We simply provide the infrastructure and transportation to move it where it's needed most." It was a better offer than his original contract, but Cassandra recognized the trap hidden within it. Infrastructure meant pumps, pipes, and permanent installations. Transportation meant wagons, employees, and ongoing operations. Within months, Marcus's people would be so embedded in the ranch's daily operations that removing them would be impossible. "Who decides what constitutes need?" she asked. "You do, in consultation with our regional managers." Consultation meaning I get overruled whenever our opinions differ. Marcus's silence was answer enough. "Here's my counter-proposal," Cassandra said. "You and your men leave tonight. I continue operating the well as I always have, providing water to those who need it most. Your investors find another business opportunity." "Impossible. Too much has been invested already." "Then you're about to lose that investment." The standoff resumed, neither party willing to yield ground. Around them, the desert night deepened, stars emerging in brilliant profusion across the cloudless sky. The air carried scents of sage and creosote, familiar perfumes that reminded Cassandra why this land was worth fighting for. In the distance, Marcus's men maintained their positions along the ridge, dark silhouettes against the star-filled horizon. They were professionals, patient and disciplined, but even professionals had limits. As the night wore on, their attention would waver, their vigilance decrease. That was when Cassandra would make her move. "You know," Marcus said conversationally, "I've been thinking about your explosive charges. Dynamite requires careful handling, especially in this climate. Heat can destabilize it, make it unpredictable. A man would need considerable experience to place charges safely in underground caves." Cassandra's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression neutral. Marcus was probing again, looking for inconsistencies in her story. "My grandfather was a thorough teacher," she replied. "I'm sure he was. But theoretical knowledge and practical application are different things. When did you last inspect these charges? How do you know they haven't degraded over time?" Good questions. Dangerous questions. The kind that revealed how thin her bluff actually was. "Why don't you stick around and find out?" she suggested. Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Miss Reeves, you're a remarkable woman, but you're also isolated and outnumbered. This stalemate can't last forever. Eventually, you'll need supplies, food, ammunition. My men can wait longer than you can." He was right, and they both knew it. Cassandra's advantage lay in her knowledge of the terrain and her supposed access to explosives. But those advantages would erode over time, especially if Marcus's men established a proper siege perimeter, unless she acted first. "Tom, Miguel," she called without taking her eyes off Marcus. "You boys feeling up to a little walk?" Tom Henderson straightened, understanding immediately. "Yes, ma'am. Where we headed?" "The old mine shaft. Time to collect some insurance." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I wouldn't recommend that course of action." "Good thing I'm not asking for your recommendation." Cassandra began backing toward the ranch house, her rifle never wavering from its target. Tom and Miguel moved to flank her, their earlier bonds removed during Marcus's temporary retreat. The three of them formed a small but determined unit, bound together by shared danger and mutual loyalty. "My men won't let you reach those explosives," Marcus warned. "Your men are half a mile away and scattered across difficult terrain. By the time they reorganize, we'll be underground." It was not entirely true. The cave entrance was only 50 yards from the house, concealed behind the false wall in the root cellar. But Marcus did not need to know that. "Stop where you are," Marcus commanded, his hand moving toward his pistol. "Draw that gun and see what happens," Cassandra replied calmly. Marcus hesitated, his tactical training warring against his survival instincts. At this range, with Cassandra's rifle already aimed, he would be dead before his pistol cleared its holster. But allowing her to reach the explosives would doom his entire mission. The decision was made for him by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. 3 riders were galloping toward the ranch from the east, moving fast across the broken ground. Marcus's men were converging on his position, having spotted the standoff developing near the well. "Looks like your boys don't trust you to handle one woman," Tom observed dryly. "They're following orders," Marcus replied, but his voice carried a note of frustration. The arriving riders dismounted in a cloud of dust and jingling spurs, their weapons drawn and ready for action. They were hard men, the kind hired for violent work, and their presence changed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. "Boss," called the lead rider, a scarred veteran with cold eyes and steady hands, "what are your orders?" Marcus glanced between Cassandra and his reinforcements, calculating odds and consequences. With 3 armed men supporting him, the balance of power had shifted dramatically. But the threat of hidden explosives remained, a wild card that could destroy everything. "Secure the perimeter," he ordered. "Don't let anyone leave the ranch." "What about the woman?" "She stays alive until we locate and neutralize any explosive devices." Cassandra felt the trap closing around her. Marcus's men were spreading out, cutting off her escape routes, making it impossible to reach the cave system. Within minutes, they would have her completely surrounded. But they had made one crucial mistake. They assumed the dynamite was hidden somewhere on the ranch, waiting to be found and disarmed. They did not realize that the real explosives were already in position, that her grandfather's preparations had been far more extensive than anyone imagined. "Tom," she said quietly, "remember what my grandfather used to say about desperate situations?" Tom's weathered face creased into a grim smile. "When you're backed into a corner, don't fight your way out. Blow the corner to pieces." "Miguel, you understand Spanish, right?" The young man nodded, confusion evident in his dark eyes. "La Cueva del Oro." "Tell me where it is." Understanding dawned on Miguel's face. The Golden Cave, her grandfather's pet name for the main chamber of the underground complex. Every ranch hand learned about it eventually, though few understood its true significance. "Behind the house, senorita, where the old man used to keep his private supplies." "How many entrances?" "3 that I know of. Maybe more." Marcus was listening to this exchange with growing alarm. His research had uncovered no mention of extensive cave systems beneath the ranch. If Cassandra had multiple escape routes, multiple hiding places, the tactical situation became far more complex. "What are you planning?" he demanded. "Insurance," Cassandra replied. "The kind that guarantees everyone goes home alive." She was moving toward the house now, using Tom and Miguel as shields while keeping her rifle trained on Marcus. His men were closing the net, but slowly, uncertain about the explosive threat and unwilling to risk their leader's life. That caution bought Cassandra the time she needed to reach the porch steps. From there, the root cellar entrance was only 20 feet away, concealed beneath a heavy wooden door that most visitors assumed led to a storm shelter. "Last chance, Marcus," she called. "Order your men back or find out what my grandfather really left behind." Marcus looked around at his scattered forces, at the dark landscape that could hide any number of threats, at the determined young woman who had outmaneuvered him at every turn. His investors expected results, not excuses. But dead investors could not collect profits from destroyed resources. "How do I know you won't detonate the charges anyway?" he asked. "You don't. But I'm willing to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Cassandra reached the porch, her back now against the ranch house wall. Tom and Miguel flanked her, their own weapons drawn, though neither man was particularly skilled with a pistol. But their presence added weight to her position, made her seem less isolated and vulnerable. "You want water rights?" she said. "Fine, but on my terms, not yours. I'll sell you access to the well, but you don't get to control distribution. You don't get to decide who lives and who dies based on profit margins. Marcus considered this unexpected offer. It was not what his investors wanted, but it might be the best deal available under the circumstances. What are your terms? $50,000 upfront, 25% of all revenues, and I retain final authority over all water distribution decisions. The numbers were staggering, far beyond what Marcus had been authorized to offer. But they were also meaningless if the well ended up destroyed in a confrontation. I don't have authority to negotiate those figures, he said. Then get it. That could take days. Then you'd better send a fast rider. Cassandra smiled coldly. In the meantime, your men can make camp somewhere off my property. But if I see anyone within rifle range of this house, the deal is off permanently. It was an audacious demand, but backed by the implicit threat of mutual destruction. Marcus found himself in the impossible position of negotiating from strength while simultaneously being held hostage by his own objectives. Even if my investors agree to those terms, he said, how do I know you'll honor the agreement? Same way I know you will. We shake hands like civilized people and trust each other to keep our word. The irony was not lost on either of them. After hours of threats, coercion, and brinkmanship, they were back to the most basic foundation of human commerce, trust between strangers. I need guarantees, Marcus said. Something more substantial than a handshake. You'll get your guarantees when I get mine. Until then, we wait. The standoff had evolved into something more complex than simple confrontation. Now it was a negotiation conducted under threat of violence, each party probing for advantage while trying to avoid the catastrophic outcome that would destroy them both. Around them, Marcus's men maintained their positions with professional discipline, but Cassandra could sense their growing frustration. They had been hired for a simple intimidation job, not an extended siege against an opponent who seemed prepared for every eventuality. That preparation was about to be tested in ways she had never imagined. From the eastern horizon came a sound that made everyone freeze, the distant rumble of many horses moving at speed. Not 3 or 4 riders, but dozens, perhaps more than 100, their hoofbeats creating a thunder that rolled across the desert like approaching storm. Expecting company? Marcus asked grimly. Cassandra's heart sank as she recognized the implications. A force that large could only mean one thing, the territorial militia, called out to restore order in a situation that had spiraled beyond local control. But whose side would they be on? The answer came with the appearance of a rider bearing a white flag, approaching the ranch under a flag of truce. As he drew closer, Cassandra recognized Sheriff Dan Morrison, a weathered lawman she had known since childhood. Miss Cassandra, he called as he reined in his horse, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you and these gentlemen to put down your weapons. On whose authority? Marcus demanded. Sheriff Morrison produced a folded document from his vest pocket. Territorial Governor's Office. We've received reports of an armed standoff involving threats to critical water resources. I'm authorized to take whatever action necessary to protect those resources. Cassandra felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. The governor's involvement meant this situation had attracted attention at the highest levels of territorial government. Politicians who saw water rights as matters of public policy, not private property. Sheriff, she said carefully, these men came onto my land without permission and threatened to hang my employees. I was defending my property. I understand, Miss Cassandra, but the situation has gotten complicated. There are interests involved that go beyond local property disputes. Marcus stepped forward, sensing opportunity. Sheriff, I represent investors who are prepared to develop this water source for the benefit of the entire territory. Miss Reeves has been uncooperative. Uncooperative in defending my legal rights, Cassandra shot back. Sheriff Morrison looked between them with the weary expression of a man who had dealt with too many such disputes. The way I see it, we've got armed men on both sides arguing over water while people are dying of thirst 50 miles from here. That's not a situation I can allow to continue. What are you proposing? Marcus asked. Territorial custody of the water source pending a formal hearing before the Governor's Council. Both parties can present their cases, and a decision will be made based on territorial interests. It was a bureaucratic solution that satisfied no one while appearing to be fair to everyone. Cassandra would lose immediate control of her well, but would retain legal standing to argue for its return. Marcus would gain access to the water, but under territorial oversight rather than private control. And if I refuse? Cassandra asked. Sheriff Morrison's face hardened. Then I'll have to arrest you for interfering with territorial security during a declared emergency. The trap was complete. Marcus's investors had played a longer game than Cassandra realized, using their political connections to transform a private property dispute into a matter of territorial security. Now she faced a choice between surrender and outright rebellion against lawful authority. But her grandfather had faced similar choices during the Apache Wars, when territorial authorities had demanded his cooperation with policies he considered unjust. He had chosen resistance then, trusting in his knowledge of the land and his preparation for exactly such situations. Sheriff, Cassandra said formally, I respect your authority and your position, but I cannot allow my property to be seized without due process. The hearing will provide due process, after you've handed control to these men and their investors. By the time any hearing occurs, they'll have pumped my well dry and moved on to their next opportunity. Sheriff Morrison glanced toward Marcus, and Cassandra caught a flicker of something that might have been uncertainty. Perhaps the lawman was beginning to understand the real nature of the forces he was being asked to serve. Miss Cassandra, he said quietly, I've known you since you were knee-high to a grasshopper. Your grandfather was a good man who helped build this territory. But I've got orders from the governor himself. I can't just ignore them. I'm not asking you to ignore them. I'm asking you to remember who you serve. The people of this territory or the investors back east who see us as nothing but opportunities for profit. It was an appeal to Sheriff Morrison's conscience, to the personal relationships that bound small communities together. But it was also a dangerous gamble, one that could backfire if the lawman chose duty over sentiment. The hearing is set for next week in Tucson, Morrison said finally. Until then, the water source remains under territorial protection, meaning these men get what they wanted all along, meaning everyone gets a fair chance to present their case. Cassandra looked around at the forces arrayed against her, Marcus's hired guns, the territorial militia, even the local sheriff bound by orders from above. The odds had never been worse, but her options had never been clearer. She thought about her grandfather's stories, about the moment when compromise became surrender, when reasonable people were forced to make unreasonable choices. He had taught her that some things were worth any sacrifice, any risk, any price. The water beneath her feet was one of those things. Sheriff, she said, stepping back toward the house, I'm going inside to consider your proposal. I'd appreciate it if everyone gave me a few minutes to think. Morrison nodded. That seems reasonable. But Miss Cassandra, don't do anything we'll all regret. I never do anything I regret, Sheriff. That's what my grandfather taught me. She disappeared through the ranch house door, leaving Tom and Miguel standing uncertainly on the porch. The two men looked at each other, then at the assembled forces surrounding their home, then at the door through which their employer had vanished. You think she's got a plan? Miguel whispered. She's got something, Tom replied grimly. Question is whether it's a plan or just plain stubbornness. Inside the house, Cassandra moved quickly through familiar rooms toward the root cellar entrance. Everything her grandfather had prepared for, everything he had taught her, came down to this moment. The choice between surrender and destruction, between compromise and principle, between survival and honor. She pulled aside the false wall panel and slipped into the narrow passage that led to the cave system. Her grandfather's emergency supplies were still there, carefully preserved and maintained. Food, water, ammunition, and tools. everything needed for an extended stay underground. And in the deepest chamber, wrapped in oiled canvas and stored with meticulous care, the dynamite that could end everything. Cassandra knelt beside the explosive charges, her hands steady despite the magnitude of what she was contemplating. 40 sticks of dynamite, enough to collapse the entire cave system and destroy the well forever. Her grandfather had positioned them strategically, designed to bring down key support pillars and redirect the underground spring into inaccessible depths. One lit fuse would make the water source useless to everyone. Above her, she could hear voices calling her name, growing more urgent as the minutes passed. Sheriff Morrison was trying to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond anyone's ability to manage. Marcus was probably calculating the costs of a failed mission. The militia was growing restless, eager for action after hours of waiting. None of them understood what they were really dealing with. None of them had spent childhood years exploring these caves, learning their secrets, understanding how the entire system connected to the ranch above. Cassandra struck a match and held it close to the fuse, watching the small flame dance in the underground darkness. One simple motion would end everything. The threats, the pressure, the impossible choices. It would also end any hope of providing water to the families who desperately needed it. But perhaps some things were more important than hope. The match burned down toward her fingers, its heat growing uncomfortable. In a few seconds, she would have to choose between lighting the fuse and returning to face whatever waited above. Her grandfather's voice seemed to whisper in the darkness. "Some fights are worth losing, Cassandra. But no fight is worth winning if it destroys what you're fighting for." She blew out the match. Above ground, Sheriff Morrison was growing increasingly concerned about Cassandra's prolonged absence. "Miss Cassandra," he called toward the house, "I need you to come out now." No response. Marcus stepped forward, his earlier patience exhausted. "Sheriff, she's obviously planning something. My men should search the house." "Your men will stay right where they are," Morrison replied firmly. "This is still a lawful operation." But his confidence was wavering. The situation had already gone far beyond what anyone had anticipated, and Cassandra Reeves had proven herself capable of surprises that could endanger everyone present. "Give her 5 more minutes," Tom Henderson suggested from the porch. "Miss Cassandra's not the type to run from a fight." "That's what I'm afraid of," Sheriff Morrison muttered. The 5 minutes stretched into 10, then 15. The assembled forces grew more restless, more suspicious, more ready for action. Whatever Cassandra was doing inside the house, it was taking far too long for simple contemplation. Finally, the front door opened, and she emerged carrying a cloth bundle in her arms. Her face was streaked with dirt, and her clothes showed signs of crawling through tight spaces. But her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she had made peace with some difficult decision. "Sheriff," she said, "I believe we need to discuss terms." "What kind of terms?" Cassandra carefully unwrapped the bundle, revealing 3 sticks of dynamite connected by a common fuse. The explosive charges were old but well preserved, clearly functional and extremely dangerous in the wrong hands. The kind that ensure everyone understands exactly what they're dealing with. Every gun in the vicinity swung toward her, but Cassandra made no threatening moves. She simply stood on her porch, holding the dynamite like a farmer might hold ears of corn, letting everyone see what she had retrieved from her grandfather's hidden cache. "Miss Cassandra," Sheriff Morrison said carefully, "put that down before someone gets hurt." "Someone's going to get hurt no matter what happens," she replied. "The question is whether it's just me or everyone within a quarter-mile of this ranch." Marcus took an involuntary step backward. "You're talking about suicide. I'm talking about choices." "You want my water?" "Here are the terms. Take what you need for the families who are dying, pay fair prices for fair quantities, and leave the rest alone. Try to seize control of the entire operation, and there won't be any operation left to seize." It was not a bluff this time. The dynamite was real, the threat genuine, the consequences potentially catastrophic for everyone involved. But it was also a negotiating position, an extreme stance designed to force reasonable compromise. Sheriff Morrison holstered his pistol and raised his hands in a gesture of peace. "Miss Cassandra, there's got to be a better way to handle this. I'm open to suggestions, Sheriff, but those suggestions need to respect my property rights and the needs of families who can't afford to pay whatever prices Mr. Dalton's investors want to charge." For the first time since arriving at the ranch, Marcus looked genuinely uncertain about his mission's prospects. A dead martyr controlling destroyed resources was worse than useless to his investors. But backing down now would mean explaining failure to men who did not tolerate failure. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "A real partnership. Not the sham contract you offered earlier, but actual cooperation between equals." Cassandra shifted her grip on the dynamite, reminding everyone of the stakes involved. "You provide transportation and distribution networks. I provide the water and retain control over allocation priorities. Profits get split equally, but families in genuine need get served first, regardless of their ability to pay." It was a radical proposition that would transform Marcus from conqueror to partner, from controller to facilitator. His investors would earn substantial returns, but not the monopolistic profits they had envisioned. "I'd need to consult with my principals," Marcus said slowly. "Then do it. But do it fast because my patience is running out." Sheriff Morrison stepped between them, trying to regain control of a situation that had spiraled far beyond normal law enforcement procedures. "Miss Cassandra, I can't allow you to threaten these men, even if your grievances are legitimate." "I'm not threatening anyone, Sheriff. I'm just explaining the consequences of trying to steal my property. But the territorial custody order can go straight to hell." The words hung in the desert air like gunsmoke, a direct challenge to lawful authority that crossed lines everyone understood. Sheriff Morrison's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, then stopped as he remembered the explosives in Cassandra's hands. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to surrender those charges and submit to territorial authority. And I'm going to have to decline that request." The standoff had reached its breaking point, the moment when words would give way to action and someone would have to choose between backing down or escalating to violence. Around the ranch, men checked their weapons and calculated angles of fire, preparing for outcomes that might satisfy no one. But before anyone could make the fatal decision, a new sound interrupted the tension, the approach of a single rider from the Western Trail, moving fast across the broken ground. As the newcomer drew closer, Cassandra recognized him with mixed emotions. Jake Morrison, the sheriff's younger brother and one of the few men in the territory who had ever successfully courted her attention. Their relationship had ended months ago over philosophical differences about the future of the West, but his arrival now could hardly be coincidental. "Dan," Jake called as he reined in his lathered horse, "you need to know what's happening in Tucson." Sheriff Morrison kept his eyes on Cassandra and her explosives. "Can it wait?" "No, it can't." Jake dismounted quickly, his face grave with urgent news. "The governor's been arrested." The announcement hit the assembled crowd like a thunderclap. "Governor's arrested? By whom? On what charges?" The implications were staggering, potentially invalidating every order that had brought the militia to this remote ranch. "Federal marshals took him this morning," Jake continued. "Charges of corruption, accepting bribes from Eastern development companies, using territorial authority to benefit private interests." Marcus Dalton's face went pale. If the governor was under arrest for corruption involving Eastern investors, then Marcus's own mission might be evidence of federal crimes. "What does that mean for the custody order?" Sheriff Morrison asked. "Means it's not worth the paper it's written on," Jake replied. "Federal authorities are reviewing all territorial decisions made in the past 6 months. Anyone acting under questionable orders might find themselves facing federal charges." The legal foundation for the entire confrontation had just crumbled. Without valid territorial authority, Sheriff Morrison had no grounds for seizing Cassandra's property. Without legal protection, Marcus's investors could face federal investigation for attempting to corrupt territorial officials. Suddenly, everyone wanted to be somewhere else. "Well," Cassandra said into the stunned silence, "I believe this changes our negotiating position considerably." She carefully rewrapped the dynamite, making it clear that the immediate threat was over but not permanently removed. "Sheriff Morrison, I respect your position, but it appears your orders were issued by a corrupt official acting on behalf of criminal conspirators." Sheriff Morrison looked older than his years, a career lawman confronting the possibility that he had been manipulated into serving corrupt interests. "Miss Cassandra, I was just following orders." "I understand. But now you know those orders came from men who were stealing from the territory." Marcus realized that his mission had become a liability rather than an asset. Association with a corrupt governor, attempted seizure of private property, threats of violence against territorial citizens, any of these could result in federal prosecution. "Sheriff," he said formally, "my men and I will be withdrawing from this area immediately." "Running back to your investors with empty hands?" Cassandra asked. "Protecting them from federal investigation," Marcus replied grimly. It was a pragmatic decision that acknowledged the changed circumstances. Whatever profits Marcus's investors had hoped to extract from territorial water resources, those profits were not worth federal prison sentences. "Smart choice," Jake Morrison observed. "Federal marshals are already looking into Eastern investment schemes throughout the territory. Anyone connected to those operations is going to face serious scrutiny." As Marcus's men began their withdrawal, mounting horses and preparing for rapid departure, Cassandra felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The confrontation was over, her property secure, her independence preserved. But the cost had been higher than anyone imagined. "Thank you, Jake," she said as the last of Marcus's riders disappeared into the desert darkness. "Don't thank me yet," he replied. "This is just the beginning. The federal investigation is going to turn up all kinds of corruption, and some of it might splash onto innocent people who were just trying to protect their interests." Sheriff Morrison nodded grimly. "There'll be hearings, investigations, probably trials. Everyone involved in tonight's events will be called to testify." "Let them investigate," Cassandra said firmly. "I've got nothing to hide." But as she watched the dust clouds settling in the wake of Marcus's retreat, she wondered if she had truly won or simply survived the first battle in a longer war. The drought would continue, the water would remain precious, and other men with other schemes would eventually come calling. For now, though, the ranch was secure. Her employees were safe, and the well remained under her control. Sometimes that was enough. As the militia prepared to depart and Sheriff Morrison began the process of filing reports that would eventually reach federal authorities, Cassandra allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Her grandfather would have been proud of the way she had handled the crisis, using preparation, courage, and strategic thinking to overcome seemingly impossible odds. The desert wind picked up, carrying scents of sage and distant rain. Somewhere to the west, clouds were building on the horizon, offering the possibility of natural relief from the long drought. But whether the rains came or not, Cassandra Reeves had proven that some things were worth fighting for, and some fights could be won by those prepared to risk everything for principles that mattered more than profit. The last well remained in the hands of those who understood its true value.